I'm joined now by the U.S. Senator from Hawaii, Brian Schatz. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
So, right now, we are in a moment where we're watching Donald Trump's reconciliation bill kind of falter in the Senate as it becomes more and more apparent that 14 million people would get kicked off of their health care, that it would cut food assistance to the tune of $300 billion, that it would explode the deficit. And we're also in a moment where Donald Trump is then recognizing he needs a distraction, sending troops and Marines into American cities. And we've seen protests erupt in Los Angeles and Austin and Chicago. And so how are you thinking about these protests, for example, where on one hand, it's very clear that they're being used as a distraction, but on the other hand, if we don't talk about them, then we're basically just enabling and allowing this massive government overreach that Donald Trump also wants to be able to do.
Well, I think it's sort of like it's such a weird argument in, mostly online, right? About which one of these things should we talk about? Because look at you, in less than 30 seconds, you talked about both of them, right? And talked about them accurately. And that's what I'm doing. Look, what is happening is creeping authoritarianism. That's number one. Number two is part of the authoritarian's playbook is to create distractions while they rob you, right? And so the undertold story of this administration is corruption. It's the meme coin, it's the 747 from a foreign country, and it is this tax bill where they're going to throw people off of healthcare. They're going to, basically immiserate a bunch of kids, right? The average SNAP benefit is $6 per person per day, and that's where they're going to find the savings. And they're going to find that savings. They're going to sell off public land. Why are they doing this? They're doing this to provide another enormous tax break, the biggest wealth transfer in possibly in American history, but one of the biggest wealth transfers in American history for sure, from people who need it, like desperately, to people who are the wealthiest people to ever walk the planet. So you and I both just said both things in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And we spent a ton of time arguing about sort of which theory of the case is better politically. I think we just should say stuff, right? Like, I think we should say that's authoritarian. We don't support it. It's probably illegal and we're going to litigate it. And they want us talking about this 95% of the time. And so we have to be aware of that. And it is a trap. It's not just a rhetorical political trap. It is actually a trap to get people so enraged, right, that we provide a pretense for these moves of mobilizing the Marines and mobilizing the Guard. So the other thing I would say as the No Kings protests pop up all across the country is that everybody has to be extremely disciplined. Pluralistic, people-powered movements that succeed are disciplined within their own ranks. And so it is important for us to be ferocious and peaceful. It is important for us to be fearless and disciplined, right? And there is nothing brave about just being a dumb anarchist and lighting a garbage can on fire or throwing a brick at somebody. Like, those people are not part of our movement. And we have to excise them because this is a nonviolent movement on behalf of American values. And that's how we have to express ourselves.
I'm curious what your thoughts are about the fact that Donald Trump, yes, he's sending these troops and these Marines it's mostly focused on Los Angeles, but can you talk about the danger that other cities face by virtue of watching, what he might perceive as a successful deployment to Los Angeles and how he might think about the rest of the country as the result of that?
I think it's very dangerous. I mean, I talked to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff yesterday and asked him two questions. One, is there an invasion, which would be one of the criteria for mobilizing federal forces? He said, he took a while to say it, but he said no. The second is there a rebellion? Because that's the another criteria. And he said a little more straightforwardly, no. And so, their basis for mobilizing federal forces is sort of written in the wind. So I just think we have to keep talking about how this is illegal. I think we have to keep communicating to the people who want to stand up for democracy that the key to standing up for democracy is for us to be lawful in that process, and also to understand that this is, flatly a trap. So should we fight authoritarianism? Definitely. Should we also point out the thing that is most likely to move people into our column? Yes, we should. The truth is that fighting authoritarianism gets you 45% of the public. getting to 55 or 65 requires talking about economic issues, the price of everything, the tariffs, the Medicaid cuts, the potential Medicare cuts, the food stamp cuts, the selling off of public land, the raising of electricity prices on behalf of the coal and fossil fuel industry. That's where we should live 90% of the time. It doesn't mean that we don't care about other stuff. It doesn't mean that I'm asking people not to talk about things that are important to them and important to the rule of law and to democracy. But I think it is flatly true that the way to make this president and this party maximally unpopular is to talk about the bill, which is already super unpopular, but not well known enough. About a third of the public doesn't even have an opinion about this bill. And so our job over the next week or so is to make sure the percentage of the public that has no opinion about this bill drops to close to zero.
In terms of this bill specifically, you've got a faction of your Republican colleagues who are getting obviously a little bit uncomfortable over the fact that we're going to see some cuts to healthcare, and that's becoming more and more apparent. But then you've got another faction who's worried about the deficit, and so those things can't coexist, because if you want to mitigate some of the ways in which this bill will explode the deficit, then that means that you have to that will have some impact on the cuts to healthcare or food assistance, for example. Those will have to be even deeper. And so they're kind of in conflict with each other. And so how do you see that resolving itself, where for some Republicans it's going to be difficult to go back to their constituents and explain deep cuts to healthcare and food assistance. And then on the other side, you've got Republicans who want even deeper cuts so that it can kind of offset these massive tax breaks that they're giving to themselves.
I think you described the math problem perfectly. And look, there's two ways to look at this. One is that this is the worst math problem I've ever seen, right? In terms of just competing interests. And if one side gets what they want, that by definition makes the problem more acute on the other side.
Yeah.
The way out of this is, well, there's two ways this could end. One is those contradictions combined with all of our sort of advocacy, lobbying, and this thing becoming more unpopular causes them to not do it. Right. And I think that is a live possibility. And I don't think we want to assume anything is done. And by the way, even if we fail to kill the bill, it is still an important enterprise to make it as unpopular as possible along the way. The other possibility is that, they're just going to get rolled by Donald Trump. Like, he'll lose his patience and he'll bully people into pretending that they got what they wanted out of it on the clean energy tax credits, on the Medicaid cuts, or even on the deficit reduction. Remains to be seen which side, or whether it's both sides, just sort of gets bullied into submission. But I think that's also a pretty high likelihood scenario. I just don't know which it is, and I think it is really important for us to know that regardless of, there's a lot of prognosticating in politics in place of action. Like, your job is you're a media figure, and so it's okay to kind of suppose, hey, what's going to happen here? Yeah. But for the rest of us, like, we're we're players on the field,
right?
And we are trying to impact these outcomes. So whatever the percentage likelihood this bill is, lives or dies, who cares? Like, that's why they play the game, as Berman used to say. So we got to go out there and play the game and try to kill this bill, because failing that, we still will have done some damage to the popularity of this legislation. And then the remedy becomes more of a sort of question of what the composition of the Congress is in the future.
Well, after kind of reporting on this Republican Party for so long, I think that the latter option you presented, where Donald Trump just kind of bullies them into doing what they want and they just try and contort reality to fit whatever Donald Trump wants, seems like the more likely option. And I say that because we've already seen evidence of it. Josh Hawley, who had presented himself as this champion against cuts to Medicaid and wrote an op-ed in the New York Times and has been going on cable news hits and trying to present himself as some maverick in the Republican Party because he's going to stand up and protect Medicaid, spoke to Donald Trump and tweeted, "Donald Trump assures me that there won't be any cuts to Medicaid, and so now I'll support this bill." And of course, it's completely bullshit. I mean, we've seen all of the analysis, all of the modeling from Yale Budget Lab, from the Penn Wharton analysis, even from Elon Musk himself and the CBO, that shows that this is going to cut healthcare from 14 million Americans. And so can I have your reaction to the fact that even as he's presenting himself as this champion for one specific thing, that even still all it took was a slight, bullying from Donald Trump to all of a sudden make him change his tune and present this idea that there won't be cuts to healthcare for 14 million Americans, even though it's very clear, very obvious that it will?
Yeah, I mean, that's like literally in their assumptions. That's how they generate the savings, right? They need to generate savings, and they have it on their books that many millions of Americans are going to lose
Yeah.
Medicaid. And it's, like, I don't want to get too into the weeds here, but like nobody actually believes that there are 14 or 16 million, people who are impermissibly in the United States that are collecting Medicaid benefits. That's flatly impermissible. So, I don't think anybody actually believes that. And I don't think we should spend a ton of time disproving that. But I'll also say that if our strategy hinged on Josh Hawley, then it was a pretty weak strategy.
Yeah.
I think there are other people who are a little more deeply uncomfortable with this stuff and have a history of, charting their own course. Not obviously as much as we want or wish they had, but I think there are better targets for killing this bill.
Who should folks who are watching right now who live in these states, I'm assuming, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, folks who are living in those states, who should they be calling on the Senate side?
I mean, my view is wherever you live, call your House member, call your senator. There's no state that you should leave, untouched. I do think people need to hear from their home states, right? Like there's a lot of lobbying and there's a lot of comms around this bill. There's not a mass mobilization against it. And in this age of sort of internet communications, it's interesting how powerful the phone call to the office is, right? You got two people out front in a Senate office, one person out front in a House office, and it doesn't take that many phone calls to kind of make it, whoa, that was a firestorm of phone calls, right? 30, 40 phone calls feels like a really hot morning. That's not impossible to mobilize, right? And so don't let all your organizing be online. Make a few phone calls to your member offices.
And finally, I have to ask, because we're seeing this kind of play out in real time, why do you presume Elon came crawling back?
I have no idea. I don't know what to make of that relationship. I assume they just both know that it is mutually beneficial economically to them.
Right, a marriage of convenience.
Yeah, I mean, and I do think they liked each other because they sort of peas in a pod in a certain way. But I'm not the Kremlinologist on this matter.
All right. Well, what I will do is I'm going to put the in the post description of this video, I'm going to put the phone number to make sure that everybody who's watching right now and listening right now can call their members and their senators. Let's get some action. It only takes a couple of minutes out of your day, maybe even just 60 seconds out of your day to do this. But as the senator said, this can have a big impact for just a small lift here. So with that said, Senator Schatz, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.